has access to reliable, high-speed broadband. Work, education, our healthcare, even check-ins from faraway loved ones require a broadband connection. Yet too many Americans still lack access to the essential services from the mountains of North Carolina to the military base at Fort Bragg in my district. Reaching those final unserved and underserved Americans requires funding. It also requires permitting reform. Often broadband deployment is prevented or delayed because of burdensome, opaque, and expensive permitting processes that exist at every level of government, federal, state, and local. These unnecessary obstacles not only increase cost for deployment, but they also delay progress for communities that have already waited, frankly, too long. We need to address these challenges if we hope to close the digital divide once and for all. The legislation we're marking up today does just that. First, we streamline the state and local permitting process by implementing clear timelines or shot clocks on application reviews and capping excessive fees. Next, we exempt certain projects, mostly those on previously disturbed lands, from having to perform cumbersome and duplicative environmental and historic preservation reviews. Finally, we reduce barriers to deployment on federal lands and increase coordination among different federal agencies. Together, these reforms will add much-needed certainty, predictability, and accountability to the broadband permitting process and help expedite deployment. Many of these ideas are not new. In fact, some have already been enacted by the Federal Communications Commission under then-Chairman Ajit Pai. The FCC reformed state and local permitting by implementing shot clocks on reviews, capping fees, and removing other barriers to deployment. These reforms accelerated the rollout of 5G and showed how streamlining this process can make a real difference. Congress needs to codify and build on these reforms so they last. We're on the verge of closing the digital divide and need to act now. After 4 years of delays caused by the Biden-Harris administration, deployment will soon begin through the $42.45 billion Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD, program. But for these programs to succeed, permitting reform is essential. Otherwise, all this money will be tied up in further unnecessary reviews and bureaucratic delays. We cannot let the millions of unserved and underserved Americans continue waiting for the connectivity they need simply because we failed to modernize outdated rules. 6 of the bills we're marking up today are bipartisan. I'm pleased we found common ground on these reforms and hope we can continue working together to make the remaining bills bipartisan as well. Closing the digital divide has always been a shared goal of this committee, regardless of which party holds the gavel. We should not allow red tape and outdated bureaucracy stand between Americans and the connectivity they need to work, to learn, to innovate, and to thrive. I want to thank my colleagues for their continued commitment to this issue and for their work developing these proposals. I look forward to moving these bills through the committee and onto the floor so we can deliver results for the American people. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from California, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back. Broadband is today's essential service. Families need it to help their kids learn, to keep their jobs, and to get care when they're sick. So I'm glad we're having this markup today because we have a lot of work to do to make sure the internet is accessible and affordable to everyone. We just went through a shutdown during which we did nothing to address the affordability crisis in America. Speaker Johnson kept us out of session, not doing our jobs for a remarkable 54 days, all because Republicans refused to even consider extending the ACA's enhanced premium tax credits while families are staring at skyrocketing health costs. And President Trump has failed to bring everyday prices down. Too often, the very people high prices are hurting the most are also the ones still waiting for affordable, reliable broadband. They can't keep waiting. As we begin this markup, our job today is clearing real barriers to deployment while preserving safeguards that protect communities. We can do both, but to do so, we need to consider the broader context that will shape whether any of this work succeeds. State broadband offices, local leaders, and providers have been planning projects for years under BEAD and digital equity programs. Since day one, President Trump has thrown this process into chaos, freezing funds, forcing restarts, and stripping affordability protections, slowing deployment, and keeping costs high. We're seeing this up close in my district. California is investing big to close the digital divide, including the $38 million in last-mile funding to Sacramento County alone, but we still need BEAD dollars to finish the job. That includes connecting the dead zones just 20 minutes outside of Sacramento and reaching the dozens of Delta farming communities still waiting for reliable service. If we move one step forward on permitting while taking 2 steps back on BEAD, we won't close the digital divide, we'll widen it. Despite these concerns, I am encouraged by the bipartisan items before us, proposals that are targeted, practical, and consistent with what we've heard from states, localities, and builders. They make the permitting process more predictable and pushing agencies to coordinate. Everyone benefits when we make the process more transparent. I'm especially proud of the Digital Applications Act, which I co-lead with Representative Kamek. This bill creates a one-stop online portal to accept, process, and track broadband permitting applications on federal land. It promotes transparency and accountability for a process that's often fragmenting, helping us deliver predictable timelines without sacrificing the public interest. Unfortunately, there are some bills today that I won't be able to support, proposals that would force local governments to meet tight deadlines without any extra staff or funding. And if this clock runs out, the project is automatically approved. That may sound like a way to speed things up, but in reality, it cuts out community input, leads to mistakes, and sets us up for more delays down the road. If we want faster reviews, we should give local communities more help, not take away their say. Let's be honest. Let's call out what's really slowing deployment: the Trump administration's constant disruptions to BEAD. Meanwhile, Republicans are cherry-picking stories about slow permits to justify steamrolling local voices and rubber-stamping approvals. Families in Sacramento across all our districts just want this to work. They want to get online, be able to afford their bills, and know the connection would be there when they need it. We can get there if we work together. Let's pass our bipartisan bills, stop this administration from kneecapping federal broadband funding, and finally get shovels in the ground. With that, I look forward to the discussion of these bills, and I yield the balance of my time. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, for 5 minutes for an opening statement. He is speaking on behalf of the gentleman from Kentucky, the Chairman of the full committee. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Hudson, for holding this important markup. Streamlining the broadband permitting process is important for 2 simple reasons: closing the digital divide and ensuring America's leadership in artificial intelligence. Broadband is an essential part of everyday life, but too many parts of this country, particularly rural areas like most of my district, are still unserved or underserved. And connectivity is essential for AI. From utilizing AI tools to processing and transmitting data, we need to build the networks capable of meeting this demand. That's why we need to reform the permitting process and make it easier to deploy broadband. Today, this process often delays or even prevents building this important infrastructure. Unpredictable timelines, expensive and sometimes duplicative reviews, and the lack of transparency all contribute to making deployment more challenging and much more expensive. Unless we reform this process, the money and time that should be spent on deployment will instead be wasted navigating duplicative layers of red tape. Legislation we are marking up today, 28 bills, will streamline the broadband permitting process and give providers the certainty and predictability they need as they plan their deployments. These bills put timelines on state and local permitting reviews so providers know when they can expect decisions on their applications. Limit application fees so that money can be spent on construction instead of paperwork. Exempt certain projects from redundant and expensive environmental and historic preservation reviews. Encourage federal agencies to prioritize broadband applications and provide transparency into the opaque federal permitting review process through requiring digital portables. Affordability for the American people is the word of the day. Streamlining these processes will save the American people billions of dollars in bureaucratic red tape. I want to thank each of the sponsors of these bills, both Republicans and Democrats, for their work and commitment to ensuring that every American has access to connectivity and it is affordable. I look forward to moving these bills through our process and signed into law. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad the committee is finally getting back to work after the Republicans shut down for more than 40 days, but I will continue to be critical of Speaker Johnson because he kept the House out of session during the entire shutdown and did not work with Democrats to make health care more affordable during that period. And after such a long and painful hiatus, it's unfortunate that our Republican colleagues have decided that the first order of business in this committee is a vote on their so-called broadband infrastructure permitting reform legislation. If Republicans are really serious about ensuring every American has access to affordable, high-speed internet service, they would join us in fighting the Trump administration for its unacceptable delays of broadband deployment projects that were ready months ago. And this is the same package of partisan bills that Republicans pushed last Congress. And after investing so much time and energy in this committee on the issue, our Republican colleagues never even put it on the floor for a vote. And there are two very simple reasons for that. First, the package is full of bad ideas that are unpopular with members on both sides of the aisle, putting arbitrary deadlines on state, local, and tribal governments to start and finish complicated permit reviews under threat of an automatic construction approval is opposed across the board by the local officials who are responsible for doing the work. Other provisions would gut any local community's ability to protect historic and culturally significant sites, especially for tribal communities. And altogether, these are the kinds of ideas that sound like reform only in Washington. Now, these bills also went nowhere because they don't meaningfully address true barriers to broadband deployment that stakeholders have consistently raised with the committee for almost a decade. For instance, the partisan Republican permitting bill does not attempt to fix the instability in the market around pole attachments, nor does their legislation even make a modest investment to hire sufficient numbers of qualified staff to speed up permit reviews inside federal agencies. And this is especially disappointing given that the Biden administration did make those investments only to have those personnel fired by Trump's political appointees. But our colleagues will sit across the room and go on and on about red tape as if these delays of today are not a direct result of Republican actions, when in fact they are. Now, right now, broadband deployment all across the nation is being delayed by the Trump administration, and congressional Republicans are standing on the sidelines and watching it happen. Earlier this year, the Trump administration delayed more than $42 billion in broadband funding that we passed as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was ready to go out to states as part of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. The administration made states go back to the drawing board on their state program plans, delaying broadband deployments. The Trump administration's new policy requires states and territories to select the cheapest bids, regardless of whether those bids are the best quality or even most effective, cost-effective over time. And Republicans spent years demonizing the Biden administration for the time it took to carefully execute a massive, highly prescriptive broadband program to connect all Americans to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. But now, almost a year later, Republicans have not connected a single household to high-speed internet. In fact, the Trump administration continues to delay the program, guaranteeing that rural and low-income communities get slower and less reliable internet service, and they're breaking the law to do that, in my opinion. And despite Republicans' ongoing sabotage of the BEAD program, House Democrats have shown time and time again our commitment to the goal of ensuring everyone has access to fast, reliable, and affordable internet service. Democrats will continue to work across the aisle to address any real structural barriers to deploying communications infrastructure across the country that would stand in the way of progress. Now, I want to say I support the 6 bipartisan bills that we'll be considering today. These bills aim to address issues that cause unnecessary delays and difficulty in the permitting process dealing with federal agencies, like updating antiquated systems and requiring standard transport fee structures across the board. So I appreciate the fact that we have those bipartisan bills, but obviously cannot support the first bill for the reason, or I guess today it'll be the last bill, for the reasons that I set forth, and I will have some amendments, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Look forward to seeing those amendments. Thank you, sir. The chair reminds members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Are there any further opening statements? The chair calls up H.R. 1343 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1343, a bill to require the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information to submit to Congress a plan for the Assistant Secretary to track the acceptance, processing, and disposal of certain forms.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To speak in favor of the bill.
You're recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak in favor of H.R. 1343, the Federal Broadband Deployment Tracking Act. I'm proud to lead this, what I hope will be a bipartisan and common sense bill with my colleague Congressman Soto to improve transparency and efficiency in the broadband deployment process. This bill, which passed unanimously on the House floor last Congress, would require the NTIA to submit a comprehensive plan to Congress detailing how it will track permit applications to deploy on federal lands. This transparency is essential to streamline the process for accessing easements and rights of way to build and maintain telecommunications infrastructure. At the last hearing we had on this issue, we heard several detailed examples from providers across the telecommunications spectrum outlining the urgent need for this legislation. They shared repeated stories of crews that were prepared to act with infrastructure that was forward deployed and ready to go, only to be left waiting for permits for an extraordinary amount of time. One witness testified that more than 600 locations could not be served due to delays in permit approvals, even though everything else was ready to be deployed, forcing the providers to walk away. Another described an example in which permits have been delayed for 2.5 years just to progress from one stage of the approval process to the next, and the company is still awaiting approval. These are not isolated incidents. They are just a few examples of the many challenges providers nationwide are experiencing. Passing the Federal Broadband Deployment Tracking Act would be a crucial step towards fixing this process and closing the digital divide, creating a more connected future for all Americans. I urge both sides of the aisle to pass this, and I'm hopeful that we can go a couple of minutes without negative comments on the administration. That would be really nice in this bipartisan effort, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on this bill? For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek to be recognized?
Just strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank my dear friend, Representative Pfluger from Texas. A good bipartisan bill today to start us off. We have $42 billion to help with rural broadband. These are areas in my district that are ranch country. They're helping feed America in places like Kenansville, Deer Park, Yeehaw Junction, and more. And, we have an 11-month runway. I'm hoping we'll get this moving because, these folks have seen some utility bills going up, especially power bills. So if we can get more affordability with regard to internet service, that would be a huge help. Areas around Central Florida like Ocala National Forest, Cape Canaveral, Avon Park Air Force Base would really benefit from making sure we're streamlining the permitting process on federal lands for these broadband applications. And so I certainly support the bill and encourage all my colleagues to vote for it, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Let's see. Are there any amendments? Are there any? Where am I now? All right, seeing as there's no further discussion, vote occurs on will be on the bill. Is there a request for a recorded vote? Seeing not, the clerk will call the roll. Voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The bill is agreed to. Sorry, I'm a little rusty up here after 43 days in my district. The Chair calls up HR 1588 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1588, a bill to require the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information.
Without objection, first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? What purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
To speak in support of the bill.
You're recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. We need to fully realize our broadband investments. To do that, we need to make smart, thoughtful, and targeted improvements to our broadband permitting process. Modernizing these systems will ensure we have an effective, transparent, and efficient process in place to deploy broadband quickly and equitably for all Americans. That is why I'm leading bipartisan legislation with my colleague, Congresswoman Miller Meeks, to expedite and approve the tracking of broadband deployment on federal lands. Our Facilitating Digital Applications Act would require NTIA to report to Congress on whether the Departments of Interior and Agriculture have established an online portal for the acceptance, processing, and disposal of the application form used to deploy broadband on federal property. Our bill will modernize the current system by moving the outdated paper-based Form 299 process online. It directs the Interior and Agriculture Department to create digital portals for these applications, and requires NTIA Administrator to update Congress every 60 days on progress made and obstacles encountered. By streamlining this process, our legislation aims to reduce delays at the federal level, improve transparency in applications, and accelerate the expansion of broadband and cell service, particularly in rural areas where reliable connectivity is critical for communities and where it stinks sometimes, to be blunt. We need a little more realism in here. It's a simple and common sense fix. Moving from a paper-based Form 299 to a modern online system is a straightforward step to bring federal permitting into the 21st century. It will have real impact for providers, especially smaller ones trying to expand service in rural areas. It could speed up deployment of broadband and wireless infrastructure. The goal of our bill is to help provide better service for people who need it the most. Rural communities have been waiting way too long for reliable cell and internet service, and this bill moves us in the right direction. Modernization of these legacy systems demonstrates both the need for and the value of reporting and oversight requirements in our Facilitating Digital Applications Act. I want to thank my colleague, Congresswoman Miller Leeks, for her leadership on this effort, and I look forward to working with everyone on this committee to get this bill to the House floor. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Is there any further discussion on the bill? If there's no further discussion, vote occurs on the amendment, or on the HR. Sorry, we've changed the format of my notes here. The question now occurs on adopting HR 1343. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. Chair calls up HR 1588 and asks the clerk to report. Is that right?
No, the next one.
Chair calls up HR 1665 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1665, a bill to require the Department of the Interior and the Department of Agriculture to establish online portals to accept, process, and dispose of certain Form 299s and for other purposes. Section 1, short title. This act may be cited as the Deploying Infrastructure with Greater Internet Transactions and Legacy Applications Act, or the Digital Applications Act.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill will be open to amendment at any point. So ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? Okay, question now occurs on adopting HR 6, is this the right number? 1665. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. The chair now calls up H.R. 1681 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1681, a bill to require the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information to establish an interagency strike force to ensure that
Without objection, first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any time. So ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? If there's no further discussion, the question now occurs on adopting H.R. 1681. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. Chair now calls up H.R. 1731 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 1731, a bill to amend the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open to amendment at any point. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill?
Mr. Chair,
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk labeled rail_ANS. Sorry.
Okay, the gentleman yields
Yield
back.
back.
Does anyone else seek recognition?
Russell was texting me.
Question now occurs on adopting H.R. 1731. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. The chair calls up H.R. 6046 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 6046, a bill to amend the Communications Act of
Without objection, first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any time. So ordered.
Mr.
For
Chair,
what purposes, gentlemen, seek to be recognized?
I have an amendment in the nature of a substitution at the desk labeled rail_ANS_01.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6046, offered by Mr. Landsman. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the
Without
following.
objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see Mr. Joyce, but I want to thank Mr. Joyce and Mr. Peters for their work. This is a bill, amending a bill that we passed in September. We worked with their teams and the committee staff to make this bill just a little bit better and a little bit more bipartisan. And so I'm really encouraged by the work that everyone put into this. This is the Broadband and Telecommunications Rail Act, and it will make it that much more, the pursuing of broadband that much faster, much more faster and less expensive. So if you remember, this goes back to the intersection between the public right-of-way roads and railroads and these tracks. And for years, laying broadband has been obstructed, delayed, because these railroad companies say, well, this is our property, and so you're going to have to go through our process. And oftentimes it's cumbersome, it's a ton of work and a ton of money. And again, it just leads to delays and a greater expense for broadband providers and the folks that they serve. The changes here protect labor and ensure public safety. And so I just, again, want to thank my colleagues for doing this and just say, before I yield back, that this is a moment where both sides, I believe, want to get the country building again, whether that's housing or energy or, in this case, broadband. And this bill, along with the others, will get us there. But I am grateful to my team and Mr. Joyce and Mr. Peters for working with us to make this bill better. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to speak on H.R. 6046. I want to thank my colleagues, Representative Joyce, Representative Landsman, and Representative Peters, for their many months of work on this legislation. While more remains to be done, today's subcommittee markup and the aims that will be offered by Representative Landsman demonstrates our commitment to continuing working with our colleagues across the aisle ahead of a full committee markup. With that, I yield back. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? For purpose, the gentleman from California wish to be recognized.
Move to strike the last word on the Ains.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also proud to co-lead the Broadband and Telecommunications Rail Act with my colleagues, Representative Joyce and Landsman. We have heard that when broadband companies try to build out telecommunications infrastructure along railroad crossings, the costs and approval times skyrocket. And that's not acceptable. The high costs and lengthy delays are keeping our constituents from connecting to the internet and only furthers the digital divide in America. To streamline the deployment process between broadband providers and railroad carriers, this bill will implement firm timelines, conflict resolution processes, and fee scales to help the Federal Communications Commission move faster in support of the public interest. It would outline the responsibilities of each party and give the FCC authority where it previously had none. So this bill solves a real problem we were facing in helping our constituents get connected to the internet. In the age of technology, it's more important than ever for Americans to be connected as quickly as possible so they can access employment opportunities, education, telehealth care. And by streamlining broadband deployment and speeding up access to fast, reliable, and affordable internet connection, we can work towards bridging the digital divide, ensuring equal access to educational and economic opportunities. So thanks again to my colleagues. I look forward to working with the subcommittee and the full committee as we move toward markup and to the floor. Appreciate the work, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing not, all in favor of the amendment shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? The question now occurs on adopting H.R. 6046 as amended. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. The chair calls up H.R. 2289 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 2289, a bill to provide that ineligible facilities request under
Without
section-
objection, first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any time. So ordered. Does anyone seek to be recognized on the bill? For what purposes, the gentleman from Georgia seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2289, offered by Mr. Carter of Georgia. Strike all after the enacting clause.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all my colleagues for their work to lead on different solutions to lower barriers and streamline the processes for deploying broadband to all Americans. This amendment includes several provisions authored by my Republican colleagues addressing everything from duplicate or unnecessary environmental reviews, limiting unnecessary application fees, and providing certainty on the timelines for reviewing permitting requests. At our legislative hearing, we heard from experts that broadband permitting remains a barrier to closing the digital divide. Today, we are taking an important step to unleash innovation and turbocharge public and private investment. First, my amendment would streamline the process for requesting approvals to deploy new broadband infrastructure, including wireless towers or structures, fixed broadband and fiber optic cables, and cable service provider requests. The amendment would require that application fees to review permitting applications are based on actual and direct cost, that providers receive a response within a reasonable amount of time, and that there are clear rules of the road for when these timeframes begin and end. And in cases where a broadband provider thinks they were wrongfully denied the ability to provide service, they can receive relief so that they can focus their time and energy on what matters most, connecting all Americans. Second, my amendment will streamline the process for requesting approval to upgrade existing infrastructure, including adding 5G to existing 4G towers, upgrading old copper lines to fiber, or deploying Open RAN compatible technologies that will help trusted equipment vendors develop an alternative to Chinese vendors like Huawei and ZTE. These changes will help limit the environmental impact of needing new infrastructure by encouraging providers to upgrade facilities in areas that have already undergone an environmental or historical preservation review. Finally, my amendment will ensure that environmental reviews for broadband deployments are proportional to the level of deployment taking place. In cases where broadband providers are simply upgrading infrastructures and right-of-ways that have already been disturbed by other communications or electric utility infrastructure, an environmental review has already been undertaken and the land has already been disturbed. My amendment would remove the requirement to undergo these reviews where broadband infrastructure is being deployed entirely in an area for which a review has already been conducted and infrastructure already exists. This includes waiving the environmental reviews to replace untrusted equipment that is eligible for reimbursement under the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act. This straightforward reform will remove a key barrier to broadband deployment, especially on federal lands where reviews can take more than 2 years. This amendment combines legislation led by every one of my Republican colleagues on this committee, and I would like to thank them for their thoughtful proposals to bring affordable broadband to their communities quickly and ensure that taxpayer dollars are not wasted on more red tape. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Is there, for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek to be recognized?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment, Mr. Chairman, to reflect on the timing of these discussions and this amendment. We are here in Native American Heritage Month, a time when we honor the rich history, culture, and contributions of tribal nations across the country. And yet, some of these provisions in the permitting bills we are considering today in this amendment will allow exemptions to the National Historic Preservation Act, exemptions that could put tribal history, culture sites, and sacred lands at risk. And there is a troubling irony in that. On one hand, you celebrate and acknowledge tribal heritage. On the other, you are advancing legislation that could erode the very history we claim to honor. Streamlining processes may be important, but it cannot come at the cost of erasing history or undermining tribal sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty is not just a legal concept, it is a matter of fairness, justice, and respect for the nation-to-nation relationship that defines our country. We cannot, in good conscience, move forward with legislation that impacts tribal lands while leaving tribal communities underfunded or stripping them of the authority to decide their own future. Honoring tribal nations means more than a post on social media recognizing the month. It means action. It means upholding their rights, respecting their history, and ensuring that federal programs are designed in partnership with, not imposed upon, tribal communities. That is the measure of true progress. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek to be recognized?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Strike the
What
last
purpose?
word.
Then you're recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman from Georgia for leading this essential legislation, which is an important step in ensuring that every American has access to high-speed broadband. It makes common sense reforms that will make permitting applications less costly, more timely, and more predictable, which is essential to closing the digital divide. Included in this things is my legislation, the Wireless Leadership Act, which will help expedite the deployment of wireless infrastructure. This legislation will set timelines that state and local governments must abide by when reviewing applications and create a deemed grant remedy for reviews that miss deadlines. It would also reduce the cost of deployment by limiting the fees of those governments that can charge, can charge before reviewing applications and using the right-of-way. We need to make sure new networks can be built in a timely and cost-efficient manner. And broadband permitting reform is the missing piece of the puzzle to ensure that every American has access to the internet. I'm pleased we're forwarding this legislation to the full committee, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. For what purpose the gentleman from California seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, you would strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized to speak on the amendment for 5 minutes.
I just want to say, I think it's unfortunate that we are bunching all of this together and don't have a discussion about it. There's much in here that I think is consistent with what I'm trying to do on energy and permit reform. And there's efforts here to reduce duplicative review, and I would just call out a few that I'm interested in. The Wildfire Communications Resiliency Act, the 3960, the Connecting Community Post-Disasters Act, this 5264, the Speed for Broadband Infrastructure Act, the Trusted Broadband Networks Act, the Granted Act, all really interesting ideas, I think, are consistent with principles that I could support. Unfortunately, because we're, I guess, jammed for time, we can't discuss these individually. We're not going to have a discussion about those, but I do support getting rid of duplicative review. I think there's some things in this package worth supporting, but unfortunately, it's mixed with a lot of stuff that I think I object to, and look forward to working with the committee on finding those areas where we can agree and move forward. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. For what purpose the gentleman from Florida seek to be recognized?
Move strike to our last word, Mr.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge support for the 28 permitting reform bills we're marking up today. These bills are crucial for building commercial and federal broadband capabilities. If we want to secure our technological dominance on a global scale, we must follow through for our communications industry, for national security and American families. Luckily, we've succeeded this year in a few major ways. We've delivered a huge win to the American people with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, unleashing over 800 megahertz of spectrum and securing major tax extension benefits to assist industry in achieving these goals. However, we need to follow through on these promises by enacting permitting reform. Without permitting reform, none of the infrastructure needed to connect Floridians who've been waiting for years will be a reality. Aside from government funding, we've passed specifically for broadband programs like $42 billion for the BEAD program. One of the most prominent permitting actions we've taken was in 2018 when Congress passed the Mobile Now Act, which established a 270-day deadline for executive agencies to grant right-of-way or leases to install, construct, modify, or maintain communications facilities on federal property. But 270 days seems like an exorbitant amount of time to replace critical infrastructure after a hurricane or natural disaster. My bill, Connecting the Communities Post-Disaster Act, would help resolve these processing and permitting hurdles. It will accelerate replacing and improving communication facilities in presidentially declared disaster areas, and I'm confident we have solutions in these bills today to address the much-needed updates in our current laws on broadband infrastructure and deployment. I urge support from my colleagues on both sides to pass these critical bills, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, the gentleman. For what purpose the gentlelady from Michigan seek to be recognized?
I move to strike the last word, Mr.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very concerned about what this bill does to the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. I'm a staunch defender of the environment, and many of you know how hard the man who this room is named after worked on NEPA as an original author and having it signed into law. Today, NEPA remains one of our nation's strongest tools to ensure communities have meaningful input on major federal actions. And that's why I'm deeply concerned with Title III, Section 301 of this amendment, which would exempt any covered project from both NEPA and the National Historic Preservation Act. Section 301 says that any federal authorization for a covered project cannot be considered a major federal action under NEPA and cannot be considered an undertaking under NHPA. In practice, that means no environmental review and no historic preservation review. Full stop. And the definition of a covered project is incredibly broad. It includes the mounting, the installation, or modification of wireless facilities, wireline deployments on existing infrastructure, small cells, and nearly all work in public rights-of-way. It also includes any deployment in a brownfield, which should alarm anyone whose community has ever dealt with environmental cleanups or Superfund sites, something Southeast Michigan knows too well. These are areas where vulnerable communities already bear the brunt of pollution and climate risk. Under this legislation, broadband infrastructure in brownfields would totally bypass environmental review. Covered projects also include post-disaster rebuilds, equipment swaps, removing insecure equipment, and projects under FCC geographic licenses. Even significant modifications like antenna swaps, equipment upgrades, or expansion of existing towers are already largely exempt under existing categorical exclusion parameters. In effect, almost every routine wireless and wireline deployment already skips any serious level of NEPA review altogether. NEPA's directive is straightforward. The federal government must consider how a project will affect the environment, and the people impacted should have a real chance to weigh in. That includes examining climate impacts, environmental justice concerns, and effects on culturally or historically sensitive sites. Eliminating those reviews means eliminating the voices of frontline communities, many of which have been ignored or overburdened for too long. I believe we should have bipartisan conversations about smart and targeted permitting reform. And I've said before, I welcome an honest conversation about long-term NEPA modernization that protects communities while allowing projects to move efficiently. But this proposal takes the wrong approach. It doesn't streamline NEPA, it guts it. We should not have to choose between deploying broadband and protecting bedrock environmental laws. We can and should do both. What we cannot do is adopt exemptions that silence communities and undermine decades of environmental protection. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to reject this aims and oppose this legislation. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what purposes, gentleman from New Jersey seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am glad to see this committee advancing common sense legislation to streamline and standardize permitting for critical wireless infrastructure that we all rely on. With these reforms, we can both improve inefficient processes and clear bottlenecks while respecting the rights of local, state, and federal stakeholders to make their voices heard. We also have a real opportunity to find consensus on ways to modernize and improve efficiency within federal agencies. In addition to many important measures in this markup that is led by colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I have introduced the Enhancing Administrative Reviews Broadband Deployment Act, which will direct a review of administrative barriers, timely reviews of federal permitting applications, and to propose improvements. This bill sits before the House Natural Resources Committee. I look forward to continuing this timely conversation on how we can drive a whole-of-government approach to improving efficiency within our government. I support this amendment, and I yield back.
For what purposes, gentlelady from California seek to be recognized?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to highlight the most dangerous consequences of this bill. The Republican broadband permitting bill forces state, local, and tribal governments into rigid federal deadlines called shot clocks. Miss the deadline, and the project automatically moves forward, even if safety inspections, environmental reviews, or cultural protections are incomplete. Make no mistake, this is not reform. This is a blueprint for rushed decisions, unsafe construction, and communities being cut out of critical decisions that affect their broadband access and safety. Broadband deployment depends on officials who know their communities and local impacts, but this bill punishes them with rigid deadlines that ignore local realities. A county of one staff member reviewing dozens of applications or a city managing wildfire risk and underground utilities would have to meet the same timeline as every other community. If they can't keep up, projects move forward automatically. Before safety inspections are done, before environmental risks are reviewed, before local input is considered. That's dangerous and not the turbocharge that's needed. For tribal nations, the stakes are even higher. They are sovereign governments, and the United States has a legal and moral trust responsibility to protect their lands and resources. And this bill forces tribal governments into rigid deadlines, just as it does to states and localities. THPOs, or Tribal Historic Preservation Offices, review projects for impacts on sacred sites, cultural resources, and historic landmarks. These offices are already understaffed and underfunded by Congress, yet this bill forces them to meet impossible deadlines, leaving them no choice but to approve projects on a rush schedule or watch them automatically move forward without tribal input. By imposing restrictive shot clocks on tribal nations and THPOs, this bill pushes tribes out of the review process, violates the federal trust, and puts tribal communities at risk. Congress could fix the real problem by fully funding THPOs, yet Republicans refuse to invest. And this is nothing new. The Trump administration and congressional Republicans have consistently failed tribal communities. As we speak, Trump's NTIA is hoarding nearly $1 billion in tribal broadband connectivity grants that Congress approved. Funds that could connect thousands of unserved Native homes. That's unacceptable. Rushing tribal consultation may satisfy the majority's political calendar, but it betrays our nation's obligations. Across the board, state, local, and tribal, these shot clocks are shortcuts, not solutions. They do not build safe infrastructure. They do not expand broadband access responsibly. And the people who will pay the price are the communities we represent. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek to be recognized?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we all share a commitment to ensuring that America remains on the forefront of information technology, and as part of that mission, it is critical that we continue to support and find ways to increase Americans' access to broadband internet. And that's a specific problem in rural parts of America like the one that I represent. It surprises a lot of people to find out that my district has 78% of its land mass that is federal land managed by agencies like the Department of the Interior and the Department of Agriculture. And those are the agencies that are responsible for reviewing and approving applications to deploy broadband and specifically broadband connectivity across federal property. But unfortunately, those agencies have been historically very slow to approve applications for leases on that federal land. So we here in Congress have tried to address that problem in the past by directing those agencies to develop a master contract to govern the placement of broadband infrastructure on property owned by the federal government. We've told them to use a common application form, and we've established a 270-day clock on federal agencies to process applications to place communications facilities on federal property. Now, I want to emphasize this because we've heard some opposition to this part of the bill today, that shot clock is not adequate. Folks, that is already federal law, that 270 days. These agencies are already required to comply with that, but unfortunately, there is no consequence when they fail to comply with that shot clock, and that's why this action is needed. So I want to thank the gentleman for Georgia for including my bill in this package today, H.R. 1836, the granting remaining applications not treated effectively or delayed, or we call the Granted Act, which creates a deemed granted remedy for applications to place infrastructure on federal lands that remain pending after that 270 days. So basically, we're just trying to incentivize these agencies to make sure those applications get processed in a timely manner. And there are exceptions for various incomplete applications and other scenarios that might hamper that effort. So I think this is going to meaningfully increase Americans' access to broadband internet by streamlining this permitting process. This is something that's been a priority for the administration. I think it's a priority for folks in rural America like the ones I represent, and I want to thank you for including that in this markup today and urge an aye vote on the underlying ANS. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Is there any further discussion on the amendment and the nature of a substitute? What purpose is the gentlelady from Florida? No? What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek to be recognized?
I would like to speak to the bill.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment and the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it, and I just want to clear up a couple things. I didn't hear anybody on the section that is included in the AINS that is HR 278. I didn't hear any objection on the fee part, and that has to be justified, of course, by the incumbent poll holder or company. But there were real concerns that seemed to indicate that that the shot clock, which I'm a big fan of generally, the shot clock would force automatic approval. That's not actually accurate. I mean, it could be if there's not a legitimate reason for turning down the application, but nothing in the bill says that a local government or other entity, state, local government, Indian nation, couldn't turn down the proposal if there were legitimate health and safety concerns. And I heard somebody say that it must be approved rapidly. No, if there's a legitimate concern, the only thing this bill changes is when you turn the person or the entity down to do broadband, you have to explain that in writing. So legitimate concerns, Mr. Chairman, can be addressed because you turn them down, and then the company has the ability to go back and work on solving those health concerns, solving those issues that the local government thought was sufficient to turn them down on, and resolve those and then reapply. The shot clock, though, is to keep out some entities, and it's not a majority, Mr. Chairman, but there are some entities that are using this as a backdoor way of denying. They just never make an answer. And you can't get a resolution to the issue if you never get an answer. You keep it out there, you keep spending money on it, you keep hoping that something will work out. You don't have the ability to go, if there's not a reasonable concern, you don't have the ability to go and get an arbitrator, i.e. the court systems, to rule on whether or not it's a reasonable concern or a reasonable objection, and you're just caught in limbo. And that's the purpose of the shot clock. But I don't want anybody to think that this bill would require an approval when there are health and safety concerns, and that's why I felt compelled to speak up, Mr. Chairman. And there may very well be some legitimate issues. I don't deny that, but there's a mechanism to make that work, and this bill does not change that. It just means you've got to work on it in a different and faster process. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Is there any further discussion on the amendment and the nature of a substitute? For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment and nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to get two of the things that we're discussing today. One is conversation around efficiency. And the part that I struggle with is, like so many of my colleagues, including my colleague from California, Mr. Peters, we want to engage in that conversation. We just feel that in this Congress, Republicans lack the authority on efficiency. We saw early on in this administration, DOGE cut through federal government in the idea of the advancement of efficiency, which they completely failed at, right? We fired federal workers, ripped federal workers. We didn't make government more efficient, right? The whole point of reconciliation and cutting over $880 billion from healthcare was fraud, waste, and abuse. But all you did was take $1 trillion out of Medicaid for people across the country. That's not efficiency. And I think that there's not much credibility, which makes it hard to support the bills that we're considering today. And when you talk about a shot clock, right, and government having to act, that strikes me as really ironic, considering that House leadership had us at a session for over 54 days. We could have been here working on a number of issues, including the ones that are before us, but instead, House leadership chose to keep us in our district. So I just don't think there's much credibility to have this conversation and to take your word at what these bills will achieve. And so therefore, I'll be voting no, and I urge my colleagues to as well. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose the gentleman from South Carolina seek to be recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Mr. Carter for bringing this package together to modernize broadband permitting and finally get deployment moving. I'd like to highlight my own bill contained within the AINS, which is the Trusted Broadband Networks Act. Across the country, small and rural broadband providers are working to remove telecommunications equipment that the federal government has already deemed to be a national security risk. Providers are ready to do it, but the federal red tape is slowing them down, not for installing new equipment, but for removing the insecure equipment we've already deemed to be dangerous. This makes no sense. If something in our networks is a known national security risk, it shouldn't take months of environmental and historic preservation paperwork to remove it. My bill cuts that delay. When a provider removes insecure equipment and replaces it with trusted equipment, federal agencies should not treat that swap as a significant federal action that triggers lengthy permitting reviews. That's it. It's narrow, it's targeted, and it only applies to projects where equipment has been removed and has already been flagged under federal law as insecure. This legislation is especially important in small rural networks that serve communities like those I represent in South Carolina. These providers don't have spare crews waiting around. They're trying to comply with federal requirements and protect their customers. They should not be punished with more delays by our federal government for trying to do the right thing based on standards that the federal government has set. Every month of delay is another month that we allow adversary-linked technology to sit in American networks. This bill puts national security ahead of bureaucracy, ensures rip and replace happens on the timeline Congress intended, and helps rural America stay connected and secure. I'm proud of this legislation. I'm proud that it's part of this package today, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment in nature of substitute? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana seek to be recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment in nature of substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Matsui. I'm speaking today in support of my bill, which is included in the ANS, the Cable Competition Act. One of the clearest barriers to service and lower prices isn't technology, it's delay. Across southeastern Indiana, families are frustrated by long waits and for promised internet upgrades and better service, especially when a new cable operator takes over. Consumers shouldn't have to wait months or years for the price competition and improvements they were promised. That's what the Consumer Access to Broadband for Local Economies and Competition Act, the Cable Competition Act, fixes. It's simple, pro-consumer, and common sense. If a new operator agrees to honor the existing franchise terms, the transfer proceeds. No duplicative approvals, no moving the goalposts after investments have been committed. This aligns with Republicans' longstanding objective of removing unreasonable barriers to broadband deployment. It doesn't spend new money or build a new bureaucracy. It simply provides clear rules and predictable timelines so private investment can do its job. The bottom line is, competition lowers prices and certainly attracts capital. The Cable Competition Act delivers both, allowing consumers to keep the contract, cut the delays, and delivering families better service at a better price. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment in the nature of a substitute, which includes my bill, the Cable Competition Act, and I yield back.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bill, which is brought into this bill, the Speed for Broadband Infrastructure Act, is a very simple bill. For too long, access to high-speed internet in rural communities and military bases has been held back by federal red tape. My bill streamlines the permitting, something we've all been asked to do, the permitting process so we can deliver faster and more reliable internet access across the nation, spurring economic growth and strengthening our national security. And I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Dakota seek recognition?
I seek to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment in nature substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to speak in support of my bill, which is also part of this overall package, the Cable Expansion Act. Across rural America, providers face costly, unpredictable delays when trying to deploy, or upgrade broadband infrastructure. These setbacks stall projects and widen the digital divide. For example, just last week, I was visiting with Chairwoman Lana Jackson Street of the Spirit Lake Tribe. She talked about the challenges with BIA permitting delays for broadband and the impact that has on growing jobs and opportunities for her tribal members. Right now, an operator can submit an application and wait months, sometimes more than a year, without a response. There's often no firm timeline for local review, no uniform requirement for a written decision, and no guarantee that fees reflect actual direct costs. At the same time, local governments want to protect their rights away and hold companies accountable. The current system isn't serving anyone. We need a permitting process that's 1, built for modern broadband, 2, preserves local authority, and 3, prevents unnecessary barriers that slow down development and drive up costs. My bill, the Cable Expansion Act, strikes that balance. It streamlines the permitting process while preserving local authority over siting facilities for cable service. It establishes a responsibility to respond for franchise authorities so applications can't be ignored indefinitely. Additionally, it sets clear timelines for decisions. 150 days for new broadband infrastructure and 90 days for upgrades to existing facilities. Those are very reasonable. If an application isn't approved or denied with written reasons within those timelines, the request is automatically deemed granted. But rest assured, provide the written reasons within those timelines and be heard. This will help keep projects moving and prevent endless red tape. Any denial must be backed by evidence, made public, and evaluated in a non-discriminatory manner. And lastly, it brings transparency to local fees by requiring them to be based solely on actual direct costs. Importantly, these improvements apply not only going forward, but also retroactively to pending applications. Communities that have been stuck in limbo for years can finally get answers and get broadband infrastructure built. By creating a fair process that strengthens deployment and lowers costs, my bill will help make serious progress in closing the digital divide. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and the Ains. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California, the ranking member, seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Could you specify the amendment, please?
It's Beads Funds 01.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2289.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Connecting every community to affordable, high-quality broadband has to stay at the heart of this committee's work. My amendment is simple. None of the hyper-partisan Republican permitting provisions in this bill would take effect. This bill is a distraction from the real roadblocks to affordable broadband deployment, the Trump administration's delays and gutting of federal broadband funding. Instead of mandating arbitrary permitting deadlines and bulldozing over local expertise, we should finish the job Congress already started and see that federal broadband dollars actually reach the communities we promised to connect. Broadband deployment experts have been clear. The main reason companies don't build in certain areas is that it's not profitable. BEAD changes that by making these projects worth doing financially, not by injecting a grab bag of partisan permitting shortcuts. Congress made a once-in-a-generation investment through BEAD. States like California have spent years consulting communities, mapping gaps in coverage, and designing competitive processes so that dollars go where they need them most. They are ready to build. Instead of helping, President Trump's NTIA has moved the goalposts again and again. Guidance changes midstream, approvals are rescinded, and state plans are sent back to the drawing board, while Republicans look the other way and blame permitting. That chaos has consequences. It means families go another school year without reliable internet, clinics can't support telehealth, small businesses in my district still can't compete online. In my district, local partners have trained community-based organizations to serve as digital navigators, ready to help families sign up for low-cost coverage, low-cost service, devices, and skills training. But without BEAD deployment, they're standing there with people who want to get online, but have no reliable connection to offer them. Sacramento State has used a Biden-era NTIA Connecting Minority Communities grant to help connect more than 3,000 residents. That grant ends this month, and without BEAD moving forward, vital lifelines like this just disappear, leaving communities that finally got help stranded once again. For California and other states, the Trump administration is compounding uncertainty by rescinding earlier approvals for BEAD's non-deployment funds without providing clear replacement guidance, leaving states and local partners in limbo about planning, workforce, and a digital inclusion investments that make networks usable on day one. On top of that, the Trump NTIA is pressuring states to walk away from state net neutrality and affordability laws as a condition of BEAD funding for providers. Let me be clear, that is backwards. California fought for strong net neutrality and consumer protections because our residents demanded an open, affordable internet. States should not be strong-armed into disregarding their consumer protection laws just to unlock federal dollars. My amendment makes clear that we must get BEAD back on track. BEAD, not permitting rubber stamps, is the backbone of our national broadband strategy. It should come first, not last. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. With that, I yield back my time.
Thank you. I'm sorry, generally I'd like to yield to
Yes, I yield to
the
the
ranking member of the full committee.
No, he's going to get his own. Yeah,
Oh, you get your own time, okay. I yield back.
Generally yields back. The chair now recognizes myself for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. I want to thank the ranking member for the spirit in which she introduced this amendment. I know she and I are both very passionate about the need to get broadband deployed and to get these BEAD funds out as quickly as possible. And to that point, great news. Today, NTIA approved 18 states' final proposals. So BEAD funds are on the way, they're out the door. But almost as importantly, because of innovation and efficiency, eliminating burdensome rules and regulations that were part of the BEAD program, the Trump administration has saved taxpayers $6 billion on just these first 18 states. So not only is the money moving, but because we got rid of burdensome regulations and requirements, it's being done much more efficiently at a greater savings to the taxpayer. So, you know, the purpose of these funds was to close the digital divide. The purpose of this legislation is to ensure that the funds for broadband deployment aren't unnecessarily delayed further by bureaucratic red tape through the permitting process. Delaying enactment of legislation that would speed up closing the digital divide until it funds to close the digital divide are dispersed is backwards in logic. The funds are being dispersed. We don't need the delay. What we need to do is make sure as this money goes out the door that we're actually putting broadband in the ground and connecting people. And so I would urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And with that, I will yield back my time. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
I don't know, you're saying it's on the way and out the door, but doesn't seem to be the case at all. After years of complaining about delays to critical broadband infrastructure funding, Republicans are now sitting on the largest investment in connectivity in our nation's history, and they're sitting on it. It's not out the door. Instead of getting these funds out the door and shovels in the ground as quickly as possible, the Trump administration is micromanaging decisions made by state broadband offices And some oversight, of course, is expected, even if Republicans spent the last 3 years making bad faith characterizations about the Biden NTIA, doing exactly that, consistent with the law. But the problem is the current involvement is not simply oversight. The Trump administration is slowing down the program specifically to remove certain projects that will utilize more reliable broadband technologies, forcing states to scramble to find cheaper bills that use lower quality technologies and are more expensive for consumers. And there's no clear mechanism within the law that would explain this kind of behavior by the Assistant Secretary, as the law stipulates that all Americans be connected to broadband service using technologies that support high speeds and are scalable over time. But based on the public comments of Secretary Lutnick, it appears that the Commerce Department and NTIA are trying to run the BEAD program using cheap technologies in an attempt to net some level of savings to return to the Treasury. And this approach also raises significant concerns about the future of the BEAD funds, because specifically authorized and appropriated to cover what they call non-deployment uses. The Trump NTIA has essentially paused all work on non-deployment projects and has left states with little insight as to how their non-deployment plans will factor into their larger efforts under the BEAD program. And non-deployment funds are a critical component of the BEAD program because they ensure that unserved and underserved communities getting this connectivity for the first time have the skills and training to adopt the service and use it safely and securely. And it should go without saying that the BEAD program, all $42.5 billion of it, was enacted specifically for the purposes and uses that are outlined in the law. Nowhere in the bipartisan infrastructure law is there any allowance for the Secretary of Commerce or the NTIA administrator to impound BEAD funds in order to create the appearance of excess money. And that's why I support the Matsui amendment. By requiring the Commerce Department to release all funds consistent with the BIP, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we can prevent Republicans in Washington from shortchanging rural communities who have been left behind time and time again. And there's still time to save the BEAD program from the Trump administration, which now appears on track to ruin its second broadband program in as many terms. So look, Mr. Chairman, we've come too far, and the stakes are too high to allow this funding to slip through our fingers now. And frankly, that's what's happening. It's not going out the door. It's slipping through our fingers. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? For what purpose, the gentleman from Louisiana seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
We're in this committee today considering legislation to cut red tape, streamline requirements, and speed up connectivity projects. But the most significant delay in my home state, Louisiana, has been the Trump administration's rewriting of policies for broadband deployment funds. I want to thank Ranking Member Matsui for offering her amendment, which will prevent the American Broadband Deployment Act from taking effect until the National Telecommunications and Information Administration has released all $42 billion in funding for the Broadband Equity and Access Deployment, or BEAD, program to states. This would ensure that NTIA prioritizes getting BEAD funding out as soon as possible to states, including Louisiana, and prevent any further delays from this happening. In January of this year, Louisiana became the first state in the nation to secure federal funding for a plan to deploy $1.3 billion in BEAD funding. The state was ready to have shovels in the ground in March. Louisiana's plan was completed under Republican Governor Jeff Landry, who called this program a generational investment that will create thousands of jobs, drive billions in economic growth, and transform Louisiana's communities in all 64 parishes. Louisiana's original plan included, among other things, using $100 million non-deployment funds to improve access to telehealth in rural areas with limited nearby medical facilities. These funds would have been transformative for our state, especially now as the Republican big, ugly law will cause more rural hospitals and clinics to close. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's overhaul of the BEAD program has upended these years of planning, forcing states like Louisiana to scrap their work and to start all over again. Due to the administration's changes, the rural and underserved communities still waiting for reliable internet will be disproportionately harmed. These changes prioritize short-term cost savings and the interest of Elon Musk over durable, future-proof connectivity, leaving millions at risk of being locked into second-tier technologies. Louisiana now faces new procedural hurdles and will further delay broadband expansion, forcing the state to wait again for federal approvals and hope the administration doesn't move the goalposts for this program again. The status of the state's non-deployment funding for rural telehealth and workforce development is now in jeopardy as well, as the state continues to wait for guidance from the administration. I urge my colleagues to vote yes and support this amendment. NTIA must prioritize getting all of the BEAD funding out to states immediately. Saying that it's available and releasing it is two different things. Making sure that shovels are in the ground and people are actually working are two different things. Mr. Chairman and members, I implore you, please support this amendment that makes good sense, that really puts people back to work and really does lessen the time to shorten the digital divide. And I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing not, since there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. The gentlelady has requested a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen? Mr. Allen votes no. Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes no. Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes no. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes no. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin votes no. Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Kane? Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mrs. Fedorchak?
No.
Mrs. Fedorchak votes no. Mr. Guthrie? Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Ruiz? Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Barragan? Ms. Barragan votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Carter of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes aye. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes aye. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Hudson?
No.
Chairman Hudson votes no.
How is Mr. Ruiz recorded?
Mr. Ruiz is not recorded. Mr. Ruiz votes aye.
How's Mr. Carter recorded?
Mr. Carter of Georgia is not recorded. Mr. Carter of Georgia votes no.
How's Mr. Guthrie recorded?
Mr. Guthrie is not recorded. Mr. Guthrie votes no.
Mr. Kane?
Mr. Kane is not recorded. Mr. Kane votes no.
Anybody else? You want to change it? This one's an easy one. The clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 13 ayes and 17 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? For what purposes, gentlemen from New Jersey, seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk titled deemed 01 or underscore 01.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, could the gentleman from New Jersey please specify the amendment one more time?
From what I have here, it says deemed, D-E-E-M-E-D, caps _01.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2289.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment aims to ensure permitting agencies at the federal, state, and local levels retain the authority to make decisions that best suit their needs and the needs of our communities. No matter where you go in this country, if you want to do any type of construction, you must first get relevant approvals from the local government. And whether you're building a house or school or putting up utility poles or digging a trench to lay fiber, the local government has an important role to play, primarily to ensure the health and safety of the community. And that's why I'm troubled by provisions like these that enact narrow and arbitrary timeframes to approve or deny applications and then deem them granted if a decision hasn't been made by that time. In other words, if a municipal board or town council is reviewing an application and does not issue an approval by a deadline set by the House of Representatives, the applicant's proposal would automatically be deemed approved without any further input from the community. And I'm most concerned that these provisions will ultimately raise more questions than answers, especially when it comes to liability in the case of accidents on or near job sites. My colleagues like to demonize local governments for not approving construction applications as quickly as they'd like, but anyone who served at the local level knows there's a lot more to these decisions than a simple yes or no. No one thinks about who is responsible for ensuring there's ample police or fire department personnel scheduled for traffic duty during construction to maintain a safe environment for workers and community members alike, or the complexity of stacking or staggering certain construction projects to avoid disruptions or delays that can often occur as a result. It's the mayors and councils and planning boards and zoning boards who are responsible for answering these questions, and they're the ones on the hook if anything goes wrong or someone gets hurt. And those of us that work closely with our mayors and councils know that they're the biggest advocates when it comes to deploying communications infrastructure in their towns. What possible advantage would come from deliberately ignoring or delaying requests to improve services for their constituents? These automatic approval provisions not only put people at risk, they restrict the ability of a town's residents from participating in an open and transparent process about important decisions in the community. So I challenge each of my colleagues to tell their mayors and local officials about this bill and these provisions the next time they go home. I encourage you, as I know you would, obviously you would not get a positive response, so I'm asking you to support my amendment to strike these deemed granted provisions in the bill, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. I'll just remind folks, we waited 3 years for BEAD deployment with no money going out the door. Today, 18 states' plans have been approved. The money is moving. And with billions of dollars ready to go for broadband deployment, we have to provide accountability on agencies and certainty to providers whether or not they'll get their permits approved. Delays in the permitting process have the potential to ruin the success of connecting all Americans, and we cannot risk this money getting wasted. Here, the Democrats are seeking to strike deemed grant remedies created in this bill to ensure that state and local governments act within their review times. What's interesting is that some of the deemed grant remedies they're trying to strike were first enacted by Democrats. Deemed grant remedies are not new. One already exists when state and local governments fail to act on eligible facility requests within 60 days. This was enacted in a bipartisan rulemaking implemented by a Democrat FCC. Then FCC Commissioner Rosenworcel and Chairman Wheeler both praised the rules as balancing the need to streamlining the permitting process for the next generation of wireless technology while preserving state and local authority. Commissioner Rosenworcel, speaking about the FCC order, said, and I quote, "That's because the rules we put in place today are our first steps to encourage deployment of infrastructure that is absolutely critical for the next generation of wireless service, 5G. Chairman Wheeler, speaking about the FCC order, said, quote, "High-speed mobile broadband also requires high-speed broadband build-out. However, the regulatory burdens associated with deployments can be expensive and time-consuming. This order takes concrete steps to immediately and substantially ease those burdens," end quote. Mr. Carter's amendment applies the same reasoning to other requests to deploy new fixed and mobile communications infrastructure. Mr. Carter's amendment also broadens the deemed grants to apply to federal agencies where it is necessary in order to ensure that the timeline requirements in the infrastructure law are met. and that billions of dollars that are ready to be spent on deployment are not wasted. For that reason, I'll oppose this amendment, and I'll encourage my colleagues to vote no. And with that, I yield back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
I would ask for a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, seeing that there's discussion is concluded, we will move directly to a vote. A roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen? Mr. Allen votes no. Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Carter of Georgia votes no. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes no. Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes no. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes no. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes no. Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Kane? Mr. Kane votes no. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mrs. Fedorchak? Mrs. Fedorchak votes no. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Ruiz? Mr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Barragan? Ms. Barragan votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Carter of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes aye. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes aye. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Hudson?
No.
Chairman Hudson votes no.
How was Ms. Houchin recorded?
Mrs. Houchin is not recorded. Mrs. Houchin votes no.
Clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 13 ayes and 17 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Virginia seek to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk labeled assist_01.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature
Without
of...
objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would ensure that our state and local governments have the capacity and the federal support necessary to comply with this bill. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues just voted against removing the automatic approval provisions in the amendment we just considered. But perhaps this can be a compromise that helps our state and local partners to be able to comply with the bill. Otherwise, the bill just amounts to a set of unfunded mandates. Everyone on the committee wants to improve access to broadband by making common sense permitting reforms, something we saw reflected in the bipartisan measures we adopted earlier today. However, this bill could do just the opposite by imposing strict short and shot clocks on state and local permitting authorities, which in most cases lack the staff or capacity to process applications at the speed required by this bill. As we discussed, under the bill, if a local permitting authority is unable to complete its review within the shortened deadline, the application is automatically approved. And the project can move forward without a thorough review, without proper coordination, and without meaningful community input. As we have heard from several witnesses in recent years, most of the areas that still need to be connected to broadband are rural communities. And many of these communities operate with extremely limited permitting personnel. These offices are also juggling reviews for transportation, utilities, housing, community development, economic development projects, and other critical infrastructure. And these localities now have additional burdens imposed on them from the big, ugly bill that they need to deal with as well. By layering on a new truncated deadline for broadband permits without any federal support, we will effectively force local governments to stretch their already strained resources even further. And so this amendment says, if Congress is going to impose expedited permitting requirements, we should also provide the necessary funding to that state and local government so they're not put in an impossible situation where automatic approvals occur because they lack the resources to keep up, or they're much more likely to just reject the application outright rather than work to approve it and work on deficiencies to approve it. Let's not set our communities up for failure. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. Listen, state and local governments have never had more money that they can use to be prepared for broadband deployment than they do right now. State and local governments across the country have received hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 5 years. For example, the infrastructure law provided states with millions of dollars in planning grants to prepare for administering the BEAD program. Every single state has received planning grants from NTIA. Additionally, states have stood up broadband offices and hired the necessary staff. This amendment simply requires state and local governments to respond to permitting requests in a timely manner. While there may be complicated cases that require more time to review, broadband providers work with local governments ahead of time, ahead of submitting these applications to ensure their applications have a high likelihood of success. And so for that reason, I will oppose this amendment. Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? There's no further discussion. The vote occurs on the amendment. Would you like it recorded? Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen? Mr. Allen votes no. Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes no. Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes no. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes no. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes no. Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Kane? Mr. Kane votes no. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mrs. Fedorchak? Mrs. Fedorchak votes no. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Ruiz? Mr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Barragan? Ms. Barragan votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Carter of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes aye. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes aye. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Hudson?
No.
Chairman Hudson votes no.
How's Ms. Houchin recorded?
Ms. Houchin is not recorded. Mrs. Houchin votes no.
How's Mr. Carter recorded?
Mr. Carter of Georgia is not recorded. Mr. Carter of Georgia votes no.
Is Mr. Kane recorded?
Mr. Kane is recorded as no.
All right, the clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 13 ayes and 17 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the Ains at the desk labeled TBCP Funds 101.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2289. Strike Title III, add at the end the following.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I offer an amendment grounded in two core principles: fairness, and respect for tribal sovereignty. My amendment will ensure that grant funding promised to tribal nations under the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program is distributed in full by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, before the provisions in this bill may take effect. Across our country, tribal nations have long faced systemic barriers to resources that are essential for their communities to thrive. This became especially apparent during the COVID pandemic, prompting Congress to establish the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. Over recent years, NTIA awarded this critical funding to tribes to close the digital divide, but too much of this funding has not been allocated. For too many tribal communities, the promise of federal support is still just that, a promise. Adding to the concern, just last week, NTIA announced new guidance for the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, pausing the remaining grants until the Broadband Equity Access Deployment Program, or BEADS plan, are approved and underway. This delay is unacceptable, but making matters worse is NTIA's intention to hold the funding hostage until tribes give their consent to BEADS plans, whether they support them or not. The reality is tribal nations have been left out of many of the deliberations around BEAD in the last year. So they rightfully have questions and concerns about how BEAD will support connectivity on tribal lands. We should call this out for what it is, an attempt by the Trump administration to coerce tribal nations to give consent in the BEAD program to deployment plans they might otherwise reject to access the funding they were promised. This is a direct threat to tribal autonomy. Tribal governments have the sovereign right to make decisions about infrastructure on their lands. Federal mandates cannot override that authority. And we must not forget many of the provisions in the permitting bills being considered today would allow exemptions to the National Historic Preservation Act, putting tribal history, cultural sites, and sacred lands further at risk. Streamlining may be important, but it cannot come at the cost of erasing history and undermining tribal sovereignty. This amendment is not about slowing progress. It is about ensuring that progress is just, equitable, and respectful. It ensures that tribal communities receive the resources promised to them and that they retain the authority to chart their own development process. Today, alongside Senator Schiff, I introduced the Tribal Internet Expansion Act of 2025, which explicitly recognizes tribal nations as high-cost areas, securing them a place in broadband expansion efforts. My amendment complements that work by ensuring that funding is delivered and that tribal voices and priorities are respected. Tribal sovereignty is not just a legal concept, it is a matter of fairness, justice, and respect for the nation-to-nation relationship that defines our country. We cannot move forward with legislation that impacts tribal lands while leaving tribal communities underfunded or stripping them of their authority to decide their own future. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment. I appreciate my colleagues introducing this amendment, and I appreciate him elevating the issue of tribal lands. My state, like your state, has a rich tribal history, and we're proud of that. And so the issue you raise is important. But what's important to understand here is that we're not eliminating all these review processes. What we're doing is streamlining these processes so they're not duplicative. And look, the folks in tribal lands need access to broadband just as much as anywhere else. And these permitting delays are a significant barrier to broadband deployment. In some instances, taking multiple months or even years to complete and costing millions of extra dollars. This provision would gut the needed permitting reforms and further prolong the digital divide. And so for that reason, I'm going to urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. A roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen?
No.
Mr. Allen votes no. Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Carter of Georgia votes no. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes no. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes no. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes no. Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Kane? Mr. Kane votes no. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mrs. Fedorchak? Mrs. Fedorchak votes no. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Ruiz? Mr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Bedigan? Ms. Bedigan votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes aye. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes aye. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Hudson? Chairman Hudson votes no.
Has Mr. Bilirakis recorded?
Mr. Bilirakis is not recorded. Mr. Bilirakis votes no.
Mr. Fulcher, how are you recording?
Mr. Fulcher votes no.
Ms. Hodgson, how are you recording?
Mrs. Houchin votes no.
Okay. The clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 12 ayes and 17 noes.
Okay. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
For what purpose? Which amendment?
Amendment D4.
Okay. All right. Chair, the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2289. Page 35, after line 10, insert the following and redesignate.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentle lady is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment recognizes that access to reliable, high-speed internet is essential in our increasingly digital society. It seeks to balance the benefits the majority is attempting to hand out to providers with obligations to ensure that no community, no family is left behind when infrastructure is being deployed. And I want to make very clear at the outset of my remarks, despite what you hear from my Republican colleagues, the group of partisan bills considered today will do very little, if anything, to encourage broadband infrastructure investment and deployment, particularly as the current administration has systematically dismantled historic bipartisan legislative efforts to close the digital divide. In fact, when all is said and done, I'm confident that this administration, with the approval of my Republican colleagues, will have done more to actively worsen the digital divide than any previous administration. From delaying, then kneecapping the BEAD program and attacking affordable efforts, to illegally withholding Digital Equity Act funding and tribal connectivity dollars, Republicans seem to be on a mission to make sure that some communities stay offline, maybe for good. Talking about these meager permitting ideas at this moment in time is as insufficient as holding up a cocktail umbrella in the middle of a hurricane. However, turning to my amendment, I believe efforts to streamline broadband deployment should be balanced with our desire to ensure that low-income and minority communities who have been subjected to both traditional and digital redlining in the past do not continue to be left behind. The truth is that many of the communities that were impacted by redlining decades ago who are discriminated against when seeking to apply for mortgage loans continue to suffer with inferior infrastructure and services today, including broadband. And many will face a form of redlining once again as their BEAD dollars will be shifted from real fiber infrastructure to untested satellite service. Unfortunately, I've heard clearly in hearings over the years from our expert witnesses that previous deregulatory efforts did nothing to mitigate the digital redlining we see today. In fact, they may have made it worse. Instead, previous efforts, quote, streamline, unquote, simply allowed providers to perpetuate historic discrimination against certain communities while facilitating build-out to wealthier communities where they could make more money. My amendment would ensure that this current round of, quote, streamlining, end quote, doesn't become yet another giveaway to providers seeking to pad their bottom line. Instead, my amendment would allow providers to take advantage of the streamlined process that the majority is proposing, but only if they commit to serving every household in the jurisdiction that is granting their permit. This would help urban, rural, and suburban communities. Without such an obligation, history is doomed to repeat itself and certain communities will remain disconnected. As such, our goals of getting affordable, reliable broadband to every area of this community, goals that my colleagues across the aisle purport to share, will be perpetually frustrated. In theory, I do not oppose working with my colleagues on this committee to explore pathways to equitable, streamlined permitting processes and bridge the digital divide. So I urge my colleagues to support my amendment. And I thank you, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes in opposition to the amendment. I appreciate the gentlelady's offer to work together, but we've been working at this for some time. If Democrats wanted to have a conversation about serving unserved areas, we would have welcomed it. Unfortunately, this amendment is poorly drafted. Rather than double down on encouraging investment so that all Americans can be served, this amendment could have the opposite effect. This amendment could also lead to less competition in the marketplace if one provider is required to serve all locations, even if another provider could serve some locations more efficiently. I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I yield back. Are there any other comments on the amendment? Hearing none, you want a roll call? Okay. All right, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen?
No.
Mr. Allen votes no. Mr. Latta? Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Dunn? Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes no. Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes no. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes no. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes no. Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Fry? Mr. Kane? Mr. Kane votes no. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mrs. Fedorchak? Mrs. Fedorchak votes no. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes aye. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Ruiz? Mr. Ruiz votes aye. Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Bedigan? Ms. Bedigan votes aye. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes aye. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes aye. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes aye. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes aye. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes aye. Chairman Hudson?
Has Mr. Dunn recorded?
Mr. Dunn is not recorded. Mr. Dunn votes no.
Mr. Bilirakis, has Mr. Bilirakis recorded?
Mr. Bilirakis votes no.
Mrs. Houchin,
Mrs. Houchin votes no.
anybody else seek recognition? Okay, the clerk will report the result.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 12 ayes and 14 noes.
I'm sorry, we've already closed the vote, Mr. Carter. All right, with the clerk, okay, the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? That's it? Okay. So now, do we have a vote on the, okay.
Voice vote on the.
Voice vote, okay. Okay. So those in favor, please say aye. And this is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. So again, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question now occurs on adopting H.R. 2289 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Roll call. Okay, a roll call vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Allen votes aye. Mr. Latta? Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Carter of Georgia? Mr. Carter of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes aye. Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Fulcher votes aye. Mr. Pfluger? Mr. Pfluger votes aye. Mrs. Kamick? Mrs. Kamick votes aye. Mr. Obernolte? Mr. Obernolte votes aye. Mrs. Houchin? Mr. Fry? Mr. Kane? Mr. Kane votes aye. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes aye. Mrs. Fedorchak? Mrs. Fedorchak votes aye. Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Guthrie votes aye. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui votes no. Mr. Soto? Mr. Soto votes no. Ms. Clark? Ms. Clark votes no. Mr. Ruiz? Mr. Ruiz votes no. Mr. Peters? Mr. Peters votes no. Mrs. Dingell? Mrs. Dingell votes no. Ms. Kelly? Ms. Bedigan? Ms. Bedigan votes no. Mr. Carter of Louisiana? Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez votes no. Mr. Landsman? Mr. Landsman votes no. Ms. McClellan? Ms. McClellan votes no. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor votes no. Mr. Pallone? Mr. Pallone votes no. Chairman Hudson?
Has Mr. Latta recorded?
Mr. Latta votes aye.
Ms. Houchin, has Ms. Houchin recorded?
Mrs. Houchin is not recorded. Mrs. Houchin votes aye.
Has Mr. Fry recorded?
Mr. Fry is not recorded.
Aye.
Mr. Fry votes aye.
Okay, yes. Has Mr. Okay, has Mr. recorded?
Mr. Soto is recorded as no.
Okay. Anybody else? I can't read your name down. Okay, the clerk will the clerk will call the roll. He just called the roll. Will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 16 ayes and 12 noes.
Okay, the ayes have it. The bill is adopted and forwarded to the full committee. Okay, without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the committee today. So ordered. Chair, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.